Welcome back to Giants Latest. Hit the thumbs up button and make sure you subscribe for all things New York Giants. Today we are briefly breaking away from all the UDFA stuff because there are some new news to discuss. So let's start with this. The Jaguars ended up cutting wide receiver Gabe Davis. Now he was guaranteed to make $12.5 million with them this year, so they went ahead and designated him, I believe, for a post-June 1st cut. Now there's been a lot of talk among Giants fans that they still need some help at the wide receiver position, and because they didn't go after one in the draft, should they bring someone in free agency? They did sign or are bringing in a couple UDFAs, some of which we have already discussed, like Juice Wells and Bo Collins. But I think having a veteran like Gabe Davis in the mix could be a good idea. So let's briefly do a little rundown of Gabe Davis. So he is only 26 years old, which I didn't realize that he was that young. He played college at UCF. He was drafted by the Bills in 2020. He spent 3 years with them before going over to the Jags. Now, we all know how the Giants front office loves their Bills players. That's another reason why I wanted to talk about him, is because it wouldn't surprise me if they bring him in, because he's obviously a former Bill. And the Giants front office staff and Brian Daboll were both with the Bills when they brought in Gabe Davis. So obviously they were involved in, meeting him and working with him. And if they think that he is smart, tough, and dependable, and he is the type of guy that would fit in on this Giants team, then do not be shocked if they bring him in. So a little bit of his stats here. As of 2024, he had 183 receptions for 2,969 yards with 29 touchdowns. He's 6'2", 216 pounds. So, I think he's up to 225 now, but he is a big-bodied, good wide receiver who obviously has good experience. He has experience with Daboll and Shane, and I think that if anything, that will probably be one of the big factors why they would bring him in. So what do you guys think? Do you think it would be a good move? I think that if he is willing to compromise on some sort of price, I think it's worth bringing in. Obviously, I don't really care what they pay him. I just think that they gave Darius Slayton a lot of money, and it would surprise me if they ended up paying Gabe Davis a large sum of money because of that. But you never know. The cap goes up every year, and the Giants are actually going to be in a pretty good cap space moving forward year after year. So I think that could be a good option for them, and I would absolutely explore it if I were them. Let's talk about breaking news from the Cowboys and how this affects the Giants, because in case you missed it, the Cowboys and Steelers had a little trade this morning, and the Cowboys are getting wide receiver George Pickens to pair with CeeDee Lamb. Tay Banks is crying right now, and they just did a little swap of some draft picks. So we need to talk about this because I, as a Giants fan, like to talk crap about the Cowboys. And to be fair, I think it's warranted. We've won some Super Bowls way more often than they have. Dak chokes in the playoffs, the whole thing. We all know. But obviously, Dak is a good quarterback. I'm not going to say that he's a bad football player because I'm not insane. He is a good football player. He obviously has CeeDee Lamb, who is a really good wide receiver, and now they're bringing in George Pickens. So I think that if you are the Giants secondary, you have to be a little bit concerned about this. Now, obviously, they have to be concerned about all the wide receivers that they're going to match up against. But the Cowboys are a division rival. We're going to play them twice a year. And we already struggle really trying to cover CeeDee Lamb. So now you've got the fact that they're going to have to cover him and Pickens. I mean, the Giants last year struggled covering Cooks and Cooper. And they're going to cover Pickens and Lamb. I mean, I know they made some good moves in this offseason. My biggest concern is about Shane Bowen. But I feel like, this is going to be a real challenge for them. And what I hope is that George Pickens, does what George Pickens does and causes chaos and wreaks havoc in the locker room. And maybe that will help us to some degree. But I do think that Adebo's going to be the number one. He's going to be in charge of covering Lamb, except for when he's in the slot. Then obviously Drew Phillips is going to cover him. But I'm really worried about Banks here because he's going to have to take on a guy like Pickens. He's obviously had some experience going against, the Jamar Chases and T. Higgins and Justin Jeffersons of the world. But again, this is a division rival we're talking about. And I really just hope that the front four is going to be able to get there and going to make the secondary's life a little bit easier this year. But we really need to see a big step up in Tay Banks this year. And I hope that bringing in Adebo is going to help him, and I really hope that Shane Bowen is going to help him, put him in a position to succeed. He had a really great rookie year, and it's up to him this year. He's got a big challenge. It's up to him to take that leap forward. And I hope that he does, because obviously I want to be a good football team this year. But also, I was really excited about Banks, and it was so fun to finally feel like we have this young, talented secondary. And then all of a sudden last year was just like, I don't want to see you being lazy during the games and taking plays off against a division rival, no less. Like, it's just unacceptable behavior. So I want this front office to say, we're not going to stand for this. That is not going to happen this year. And I want Tay Banks to grow up and mature and say, listen, if I want to stay in the NFL and I want to get a second contract, I better get my shit together. So Banks, if you're watching, I like I said, have faith in you. Just prove it. Prove it, okay? All right, let's move on. The Giants made some front office moves that I think are interesting, so let's go ahead and talk about them a little bit. This is the time of the year when, a lot of scouts go ahead and move to different teams or different positions, stuff like that. And we talked a lot about this in 2023 after the front office's first year with the Giants, because there was a lot of movement after that year, because once they were hired in 2022, they obviously didn't go fire all their scouts because they only had a couple months to get things together before the draft. So I always wonder if that's one of the reasons why Shane's first two drafts were not as successful as the last two. And obviously, we don't really know how successful these two drafts really are. In theory, they look fantastic. The value is there. The talent is there. We need to see it on the field. But, those first two drafts were really hit or miss on some of those players. So I often wonder if the scouting department was part of that. Anyway, the Giants ended up parting ways with one of their national scouts, Mike DeRice, I think is how you say it. He had been in that role for 3 years. He was hired right after the 2022 draft. So this was obviously before 2023, but they did make some changes after that first draft. And this is a tweet from Dan Duggan. He says it's a common time for scouting changes, but he is surprised by this because of the positive response for the Giants' last two drafts. So I just think it's, gets to the point where some players, or scouts get ready to move on. So with that being said, they also made another hiring. They hired Usama Young as the vice president of player engagement. Now, he actually replaced Ashley Lynn, she was the Giants player engagement department. She was in there since 2007. And then in 2021, she was promoted to director. And then we have Young, who is now the vice president. So a little bit about Young. He's a former NFL player, obviously has a lot of experience. He won a Super Bowl with the Saints and played 8 seasons in the NFL. So he's been in the NFL player engagement office since 2017, help support players and their families through continuing education, financial literacy, and development in their personal and professional lives during and after their playing days. So I hope that he can help Tay Banks, a guy who we just talked about. Young also works with rookies specifically to guide them in their physical, mental, and financial well-being. I think this is extremely important. Something that we have seen over the years in the NFL as a whole is that some of these players come into the league and they get overwhelmed by the money, and then before you know it, they're broke. So I think having someone who can really help guide them and teach them is really, really important. And it doesn't just go for NFL players, it goes for everyone. You should have a good financial advisor that you trust and have a lot of faith to put your money and time into. Anyway, let's move over to the UDFAs, because Dan Duggan also tweeted about some guarantees that were made for a couple players. So I want to talk about this because we know that the Giants offered a bunch of players contracts, but not all of them have been signed, especially the UDFAs. So let's start with another wide receiver, Daquan Felton from Virginia Tech. His total guarantees are $264,000. So he had a $234,000 base with a $30,000 signing bonus. Safety Makari Page from Michigan, who we already talked about. We haven't talked much about Felton or this other wide receiver yet, so we will get into them in the next video, which we'll get back to more on the UDFAs. So Makari Page from Michigan got $165,000 guaranteed with $150,000 base and $15,000 on top of that signing bonus. And then the last one is another wide receiver, Jordan Bly from Gardner-Webb. So he got a $5,000 guarantee, no base salary, and a $5,000 signing bonus. So smaller contracts for those guys. They are UDFAs. The salary for a rookie on the practice squad is $234,000. So the Giants basically guaranteed Jaquan Felton out of all of them a practice squad spot if he doesn't make the roster, because he's the only one who got that certain guaranteed money. So I thought that was interesting. And like I said, just a couple bullet points and news for you guys to know. But tomorrow we are getting back into it with more UDFA talk. So make sure you hit that subscribe button.